Congressman, it's great to be talking to you. It's a great privilege, and I would like to start discussing Ukraine and the situation around it because it's on everybody's agenda these days. Do you feel that we're now witnessing the new wave of a Cold War?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't want to. I don't believe we're going to have another Cold War. I believe what's happening in the Ukraine now is very serious. But the Cold War was about communism versus capitalism, and the Soviet Empire versus the Western world. I mean, I don't think we're going down that road. That doesn't lessen the significance of what's happening in the Ukraine. This is an act of aggression, and my view is that the Ukrainian people ought to determine their own future, free from pressure from Russia, free from pressure from the United States or anyone else. They ought to determine what the future is, and so and our argument right now is not with the Russian people, who we have great admiration for and great respect for. Our argument is with those who have planned this kind of aggression into the Crimea. So that's. But I don't believe, and I don't think we should be talking about going down the road of another Cold War. I don't think that's particularly productive.
Well, there are other actors, different actors in the game, and U.S. and Russia are the biggest ones. Do you feel that it's becoming kind of a zero-sum game at this point?
Well, what I think is that the politicians in Washington, ought to be quiet for a while and let this thing be worked out diplomatically, because I believe that it can be worked out in a way that the Ukrainian people can determine their own future. This isn't, about Russia. This isn't about the United States. It's about the people who live in, the Ukraine. It's about their future, and I think that there's a tendency for politicians all over the world to kind of escalate the rhetoric. And as you escalate the rhetoric, it becomes more difficult to negotiate and to have, the kind of diplomacy that can diffuse this. So I believe that this can be worked out, but it's going to be through diplomacy and through discussions. But ultimately, the people who matter the most in this are the Ukrainian people.
When it comes to Ukrainian people making their decision, there is a referendum that is probably happening in Crimea 9 days from now, pretty much. It was announced. President Obama yesterday said that if it happens, that would violate international law and that would violate Ukrainian constitution. President Putin at the same time said that he could not ignore the calls from the people of Crimea who want to be with Russia. So how do you think this is going to play out if, say, the people of Crimea vote and decide to join Russia?
Well, first of all, I mean, there's a crisis going on right now, and to throw a referendum together in a matter of days and to have a vote, I mean, it's suspect. It's not going to have very much credibility. And I think the insistence, on a referendum at this particular point escalates the situation. Doesn't diffuse anything. There's going to be an election in Ukraine in May, let's have a free and fair election. Have international observers, if need be there to ensure the credibility of the election, and let's see what happens. I mean, let the Ukrainian people decide what their future is, and I think that's the way it should be. We're all, in the media, we're all talking about Russia, the United States, and Europe. At the end of the day, the most important part of this discussion are the Ukrainian people, and so we need to do is figure out a way to make sure that they get to determine their future. Not Russia, not the United States, not the Europeans, not anybody else. They ought to determine their future. And so that's what I think we all ought to be insisting on. We want to lower the rhetoric and figure out a way to work out some of these issues diplomatically and give the Ukrainian people a chance at a better future.
So do you think that at this point it's possible to lower the rhetoric when there are warships, American warships, Russian warships, close to Crimea? How do politicians need to tackle this?
Yeah, I think what politicians, and I'll just speak for politicians in the United States, need to do, because I've listened to some of the comments that have been stated on TV and on Twitter and on in press releases. A lot of the rhetoric seems to kind of escalate the tensions. Look, this is not about, Russia winning or the United States winning. We ought to move away from that kind of view of this. This is really about the Ukrainian people. And again, the criticisms that I've had, have not been against the Russian people. I have great admiration for the Russian people. It's been against, certain leaders in Russia who have kind of insisted on, moving in the direction that they have. But, I think at the end of the day, the only people that should win are the Ukrainian people. They ought to be able to determine their own fate, their own future, their own government. They deserve a government that's not corrupt. And they also have to elect a government that understands that the Ukraine is a very diverse place. There are lots of different factions within Ukraine, and you need a government that will be sensitive to that. Whether it's the people of Russian ancestry, in Crimea or whoever. I mean, there needs to be this sensitivity and understanding that everybody needs to be represented and everybody's rights need to be respected.
Some people question legitimacy of the new Ukrainian government, the new Ukrainian authorities, I would say. What's your perception of that?
Well, look, there's going to be an election in May. And what I think what the world should be insisting on is that there be a free and fair election that is viewed as credible by the entire international community, but most importantly by the Ukrainian people. The former president of Ukraine, was certainly not an example of an inclusive leader and somebody who was involved in a lot of corruption. People there deserve better than that, and this is an opportunity, if they can have that free and fair election, that somebody could emerge who will be truly a representative of everybody. I mean, that's how this gets solved. And this is, again, the focus shouldn't be on a showdown between the Russian government and the United States government. The focus ought to be on how to empower the Ukrainian people, how to give all Ukrainians the opportunity to have a say in their future.
People in Ukraine, people in Russia, do really want to know what the American opinion and attitudes towards the problem is, and if it is homogeneous. If we're talking about, say, public perception of the crisis in Ukraine, what do you think people in America want to hear from their leaders in terms of rhetoric? Because people are very war weary. They don't want another involvement in a conflict after Iraq, after Afghanistan. So how do your constituents react to what is happening?
Yeah, no, I think the people I represent, want this to be resolved diplomatically. And those who are, invoking, our militaries or potential military intervention, I think are way off base. That is not helpful. Our goal should be now to de-escalate the tensions, not to escalate them. And again, I think the American people have a great respect for the Russian people. We watched with great, incredible awe of the Sochi Olympics. I think, Americans who have never been to Russia kind of fell in love with, what they saw on TV, and it was an incredible, display for the entire world. So the American people really like the Russian people a lot. I mean, but I think people are concerned about the aggression by the Russian government into the Crimea. And I think they are concerned about the rights of the Ukrainian people. So again, this is not about the Russian people. This is all about those in the Russian government who have taken this action, and it is about the Ukrainian people. Again, we have to go back. That is the most important thing in this. And I think when people analyze what's going on, it's always in terms of the superpowers. At the end of the day, this gets resolved when the Ukrainian people get to have a free and fair election, one that's viewed credibly around the world, and they can elect the person who will lead them and hopefully help them get their economy back on track, and help the average Ukrainian, no matter what their ethnicity is, have a good life and a good future.
You've mentioned diplomacy, and if we're talking about American diplomacy, what do you think the best case scenario American diplomats are hoping for, and what do you think the worst case scenario American administration is prepared for?
Yeah. Well, look, I don't want to predict how all this, what are the actual things that are going to happen to make this crisis be resolved. But I do have great confidence in Secretary Kerry. I do have great confidence in the President of the United States. And I know that there are sensible and thoughtful people in the Russian government, who understand that at the end of the day, this kind of aggression, this standoff, is not in Russia's interest. I mean, at the end of the day, I think Russian leaders are going to have to conclude that this is not in their best interest, and find a way to stand down and to let the people of the Ukraine be able to determine their future. I mean, it's that's the goal. How we get to that, and who says what and when. I mean, I don't want to predict, but I do believe that this could be resolved diplomatically. I think that's the only way it's going to be resolved. And I think at the end of the day, Russia will see it is not in their interest to remain or to try to take over the Crimea or whatever. I don't know what they're thinking, and then we'll resolve this. But I'm hopeful. I mean, notwithstanding the standoffs right now, I believe that this will be resolved because it has to be resolved.
In the meantime, America has announced that there will be a $1 billion economic package. And just recently, yesterday, I spoke to Senator Manchin, and he actually said that he believes it's not a bailout for Ukraine. It's just something to help them get back on their feet, put right people in the government, in economic positions as well, and then they will be able to repay this loan. What is your perception of this economic aid, and did you vote for it?
I did vote for it because I think it's necessary. I think Senator Manchin was accurate in the way he described it. But look, this in and of itself is not going to solve the economic problems in that part of in the Ukraine. It's not. I mean, and we need to get past this crisis, and you need to elect leaders who are not interested in corruption, but more interested in honest, good government, and to help that economy grow. But we need to get beyond this crisis, because if you don't get beyond this crisis, it's hard to see, how the economic situation in the Ukraine gets much better.
And do you think the U.S. and European Union at this point see eye to eye how the situation needs to be handled?
I mean, I'm not in on the backroom meetings and the diplomacy. I think that the European Union, and I think the United States, and I think countries all over the world are deeply concerned about Mr. Putin's aggression, and want this resolved. And they want to resolve peacefully. Again, the details on how you get to the conclusion are above my pay grade. I'm not an expert diplomat, but I do know that if we give diplomacy a chance here, that there can be a positive outcome for everybody, and that is what my hope is. I mean, I don't want to, and that's why I regret very much when American politicians, start pounding on the president as, our president as somehow, you need to be tougher, you need to be tougher. What the president needs to be is just smart. And being smart, doesn't necessarily mean rattling the sabers. It means resolving the situation so that you can empower the people of the Ukraine to determine their own future.
So, Congressman, you co-chair the Tom Lantos Commission on Human Rights, and you received the Freedom House Award for leadership in the passage of Sergei Magnitsky Act. And it was already announced here in Washington that there will be sanctions in the case of Ukrainian crisis. And there are even talks that Magnitsky Act somehow should be expanded and should include now people who are involved in this kind of, aggression and who were to be blamed for what happened in Kiev earlier. So what do you think about making this Magnitsky Act kind of a universal and, including Crimea Act or something like that?
Well, look, the Magnitsky Act stands on its own. I mean, it's targeted at people who are guilty of human rights violations and corruption, and I continue to believe that that law ought to be utilized so that there's a consequence for people who are guilty of human rights violations. The administration has within its own power, to freeze the assets and, and deny visas to those who are kind of the masterminds of this, aggression in Crimea. So they can do that on their own. I think, I think if the situation, doesn't resolve itself, then clearly that's going to be, one consequence that the administration will invoke.
Mm-hmm. And do you think economy is a powerful enough tool to pressure these people who violate?
Look, sanctions and visa bans and freezing assets, in and of themselves, I don't think resolve this crisis. And I think to the extent that they're helpful, I think they make it clear that there's going to be a consequence, and maybe it helps Russia come to the conclusion that what they're doing right now is not in Russia's best interest. But again, we need to bring this back to the Ukrainian people, because they ought to determine their future. They ought to have a right to self-determination. There ought to be freedom of the press. There ought to be, a free and fair election. And so, whatever our response is to Russia, we can't forget that this is not about, somehow beating the Russians, and Russia needs to realize this is not about beating the United States. At the end of the day, we've got to figure out what is the right thing to do for the Ukrainian people. And I think Secretary Kerry understands that. I think President Obama understands that. And I think there are thoughtful people in Russia who understand that. We just need to get President Putin to understand that, and and begin a negotiation with the Ukrainian government. This is not just about U.S.-Russian negotiation. We should be talking to the Ukrainians. That's their country.
Well, just last year in your essay about Magnitsky Act passage in Europe, or calling for Magnitsky Act in Europe, you wrote that you would like to see the relationship with Russia normalized, functional, and productive. Do you think it is still possible in the near future, considering the...
I do. I do believe we can have a productive, normal relationship with Russia. This obviously makes it more difficult, what's happening right now, but I still believe, and so I want a normal, productive relationship with Russia. It's in our interest. It's in Russia's interest. It's in the world's interest. So we need to get beyond this. And my hope is that we can get beyond this sooner rather than later. And then move on to other things, areas of mutual cooperation, areas that are in our economic interest, areas that are in Russia's economic interest, even in terms of kind of reducing our nuclear stockpiles. Those are things we should be talking about. But the longer this crisis goes on, obviously the more difficult it is to be talking about other things. We ought to be talking right now about how we can get more humanitarian aid into the victims in Syria, that are being, in the middle, a lot of people are in the middle of crossfire between, opposition groups and the government. Those are the things we ought to be talking about right now, which are in both our interests, but also in the interests of a lot of innocent people. So I'm not here to rattle the sabers or to, just condemn the Russian people. It's not, because this is not about the Russian people. It's about the president of their country, who I think did the wrong thing, and we need to figure out a way to fix this. And so that's what diplomacy is all about. There are good diplomats in the United States. There are good diplomats in Russia, and I'm sure there are good diplomats in Ukraine. Let's all figure this out and move on.
So you think there is still potential for collaboration on Syria, on Iran, on North Korea for Russia, EU, and the United States?
I do. But this crisis right now that we're dealing with makes it more difficult for collaborations in those other areas. But we need to. We should collaborate in those other areas because it's not only in our own interests, but it's in the interest of the world. I'm a believer that we ought to create a global community of good, where we work together for good things. And but we need to get past this situation in the Crimea, and I'm hopeful that we can.
We asked our audience that they sent their questions to you, and they were very enthusiastic about that. We had a lot of response, and I just want to maybe quote a couple of questions here. Andrei Batayev is asking, what are the real sanctions, and do we know the names of those who will be included in the list? Because people always want to know names.
We don't know who's going to be included in the list. I don't know. I mean, the administration probably does, but they haven't provided us any list of names. But I'm sure they're working on it. And again, it's important to know that these sanctions are targeted not at the Russian people. They're targeted at people in the military, people who are kind of the masterminds, of what's going on right now in Crimea. So this is not against the Russian people. It's against, I think it will be against a targeted number of Russian elites, if you will, who are involved in the forefront of this situation.
Oleg Boyko in Twitter is asking, it's a reputational matter now for Putin, and what can American diplomacy offer him so he withdraws?
Well, you know what, I think with a little creative thinking, and we can find a way to help Mr. Putin step down, and I think he's probably worried that he'll look weak if he steps down. I mean, that's. But I'm sure that there is a way. There has to be, and he's concerned about the Russian bases. He's concerned about having taken this step. Maybe he didn't think it through well enough. But now, how do you step down? And again, I think probably the way for everybody to be able to step down is to refocus our attention on the Ukrainian people, and on free and fair elections, and on negotiating not with each other, Russia and the United States, but negotiating more with the Ukrainians. And I think there is a roadmap to get out of this.
And the last question from Igor Kovalenko. He's comparing the situation to what happened in Yugoslavia and asking what is the difference in your opinion. A lot of people compare what is happening in Crimea now to Kosovo.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think, everybody likes to make comparisons, but, no two situations are alike, no two countries are alike. And I think, again, what needs to happen here is that there needs to be an understanding that, there are multiple different ethnic groups in Ukraine. There are people of Russian ancestry who at this point maybe are concerned given what was going on. We need to figure out I think the people of Ukraine need to figure out a way to elect a government that is sensitive to the needs of everybody. I mean, that's the solution, so people don't feel isolated, so people don't feel that their rights are being trampled on, so people feel that they can believe whatever they want to believe. I mean, I think that's how you solve the problem. I mean, and I think again, we need to get our attention back onto the Ukraine, less on the United States and Russian, geopolitical, machinations or whatever. We need to focus on, the people who are really the victims here, and that is the people of Ukraine. So we're going to have elections in May. That ought to be Putin's way out. Let the people of the entire Ukraine decide their future, and let's make sure that there are ample discussions on on people's issues regarding rights, that there's a free press, that people can be able to hear from all sides. I think that's ultimately the way out of this thing. So I am not. So I'm here to say that I am still hopeful that this can be resolved, and I want it to be resolved in a way that's good for the Ukrainian people. And so I think we all ought to kind of take a deep breath, count to 10, let the diplomats do what they got to do, both in Russia and in the United States, working with the people in the Ukraine, and let's resolve this and move on to other things that are in our mutual interest.